Thank you very much, Chair. And I'll try and be as short as I can because we'd all like to be able to have some questions as well from the floor before we end. And I'm conscious the rapporteur needs some time to speak as well. So I'll go as quick as I can. I'd like to start by thanking Violetta for the overview she gave at the beginning, and Juan Fernando, who spoke with such passion, both of them, about the rights-based approach and what they feel needs to be done to promote that in terms of visas and legal pathways. It's great to hear such passion and such connection to the treaties and to EU law and to trying to achieve a result from those legal frameworks for persons of concern. Currently, we can see that the political climate in the European Union is very challenging when it comes to adherence to rule of law from a very basic level, and to how member states are envisaging the future of the common European asylum system. It seems that even internally there is disagreement on how to organise solidarity by states to help each other within a common union. So looking at them to try and do more, I think should happen, and we share that view, but it's going to be very challenging in the current environment. One of the things that we've tried to do, in addition to our European-based advocacy, is to draw a link between what's happening in Europe and the global discussions on the need for solidarity and responsibility. So in September 2016, we had the New York Declaration, and out of that it was agreed there would be two compacts or deals, one on migration and another on refugees. The one on refugees is called the Global Compact on Refugees, or GCR for short. And just last night, UNHCR published what's called the Zero Draft. The Zero Draft is the text of our action plan for how to make this compact become a reality. That's now going to be discussed, and the hope is that that will be adopted by consensus by all UN member states towards the end of the year. And one of the key elements in that global compact on refugees relates to pathways. And what we are calling for in that in this Zero Draft is that all member states should establish or increase the scope, size and quality of resettlement programs to meet the annual global resettlement needs identified by UNHCR. Now, our annual global resettlement needs for this year are 1.2 million. So it's a very ambitious ask in terms of scaling up resettlement to be something that will be able to have some impact when we look at the level of displacement globally. Also in this document, we call for additional pathways, and Tamas kindly ran through what those pathways are, so I don't need to spend time on that, but we call on states to do more in relation to all of those pathways. Now, clearly what's set out in that document and UNHCR's work is not about conveying to member states that they have a legal obligation to do this. Our advocacy is focused on the need for them to do this in order to respond to protection needs, in order to fulfill their real obligations under the 1951 Convention, which include not only obligations to asylum seekers entering their territory, but to think of refugee and asylum issues globally and to work together for a global response. One of the key challenges that we have when working with resettlement and other pathways is that resettlement is being cast by some in Brussels as a migration management tool. So you'll hear resettlement being spoken about as a way to address the world's migration challenges. It's not a migration management tool, it's a protection tool, and it's a protection tool that can only really have impact if the numbers increase. There is a need for a proper system for migration. There is a need for many more pathways for people in need of protection and for those not in need of protection to be able to adequately access migration. There is a need for that in Europe, and there is a need for proper systems to be in place to deal with that. We also need to establish within the European Union appropriately functioning asylum systems. This is not only necessary for asylum seekers coming to the EU and indeed for public trust in asylum systems. But where there are challenges in the EU, it makes advocacy for legal pathways that much more difficult. We hear often when we're lobbying states to increase resettlement for refugees that they can't cope with the small numbers of asylum seekers that have arrived in their countries. We have to try and have properly managed systems so that we can then provide that space for additional resettlement and pathways. To build up public support, I think that we really need to be clear for people in the European Union that asylum and refugee issues are being properly managed here, but also to impress upon them that only a very small proportion of the world's globally displaced are here in the European Union. We raise this message quite a lot, but every time it's raised, including with officials and member state officials, it seems to have been forgotten. There is an obsession with fixing the asylum migration crisis, as it's still called, and a failure to see that on a global level, member states within the European Union host comparatively few of the world's displaced. So there's a need also for us in Europe to talk about the good practice that happens in Africa, in Asia, where countries are naturalizing large numbers of displaced, where those countries keep their borders open, and to think of good practice happening also outside of the European Union. I'd like to mention just briefly, and then I'll come to a close. Thank you. An initiative that we had started recently, which was tricky for us both internally within UNHCR and externally, and that is the evacuation of refugees from Libya to Niger under what's called the Emergency Transit Mechanism. Under this mechanism, UNHCR and partners identify people who we consider to be refugees. We cannot do a full refugee determination process because of the conditions on the ground. We can have very few international staff from time to time in Libya. The work is done there by our fantastic Libyan national colleagues. So they don't have in place the kind of processes where they can do full determination. So we say we think these people are refugees. They're transited to Niger. The Nigerian government have been hugely supportive and have undertaken to take people that we refer, and they have done that with good grace and great cooperation. So they are transferred to Niger, and then from Niger, the plan is that they will move onwards on resettlement to EU member states, European countries, and other countries, for instance, Canada and beyond. That has worked for just under 600 people to date. 396 were evacuated before the end of the year. And you can see if you follow on Twitter or our press releases that even recently another just over 100 people were evacuated from Libya to Niger. So this is a mechanism that is working in a limited way, but it's dependent on pledges of states that they will take these cohorts of people. We have a very high number of unaccompanied minors amongst the people being transited from Libya to Niger. That's because we're focusing on the most vulnerable. And we need EU member states to be open to taking unaccompanied minors and to look after their needs. One of the reasons why this is so tricky is because often people refer to what we're doing as potentially extraterritorial processing. We take the view that what we're doing is we're bringing resettlement to people who need protection the most. For refugees who are stuck in appalling detention conditions in Libya, there is no solution right now. The option is to risk your life and take to the sea or remain in detention. There is an active assisted voluntary return program that is run by IOM for those who do not have protection needs and who are willing to return to their countries. But if you have an active AVR program, you must have a robust and active protection program as well. And that's what we're running in Niger. We're also going to be using the Emergency Transit Centre in Timisoara, which is based in the European Union. And we're hoping to expand the numbers of emergency transit centres that we can use so that we can scale up this kind of activity. So in short, and pulling all of this back to the title of this panel, as UNHCR, we're doing what we can to expand legal pathways, resettlement, humanitarian corridors, calling on member states to waive the need for visas for people coming from refugee-producing countries, working with partners in the private sector and academics to build up more partnerships when it comes to scholarships, working with global initiatives to try and enhance the use of private sponsorship, and also trying through the ETMs and ETCs to get pathways used more frequently. And we support very much the activities of academics and our colleague here from the European Parliament, who are really trying to push the envelope to create more protection space. And we hope that what we're doing will work in complement to all of your activities. Thank you.